It's quite hard to believe it's been a year since the M4 iPad Pro was released, and initially, when reviewing it, I thought the upgrade wasn't worth it.
Hell no, man, what the fuck?
So having upgraded from the M1 to the M4, the upgrades are only, well, spec for spec in performance, display, and pencil. So is the upgrade actually worth it considering the state of iPadOS? Obviously, the biggest upgrade here is going to be the M4 chip. And to save you guys some time, yes, it's a massive jump. A lot of tech journalists has glossed over the power and say it's absolutely overkill, but I'd argue otherwise. In my art workflow, I like to work with documents at extremely high DPI settings for flexibility in post. And with the M1, one of the biggest problems I had were its thermals. If I was working in a very high brightness condition environment, the M1 would overheat with its mini LED display. I've gone as far as to incorporate a thermoelectric cooler on the back of my M1 just for raster work alone, which I do think is a much more elegant solution than whatever this is. The M4 iPad Pro, on the other hand, has never dimmed in my usage, despite its thin 5.3mm chassis, which to me is completely bonkers to think that a piece of tech this thin can be that powerful without a fan. Speaking of power, gaming on this thing has been an absolute blast. 120 frames per second is now truly possible with the likes of Wuthering Waves, Zenless Zone Zero, and Honkai Star Rail, all being able to sustain that target frame rate. Do know it's ideal that you use Apple's upscaling metal effects combined with either medium or low settings, otherwise the iPad will thermal throttle and run the games poorly. Now for both of my iPads, I've opted for the 512GB models, which means I only get 8GB of RAM in either of them. And yes, I have ran into some limitations. In Procreate, for example, with A3 projects, I'm limited to 56 layers, and with A4 documents, I'm limited to 116. If I had the 16GB of RAM model, these numbers would be doubled. And yes, this does sound like a massive difference, because it is. Another annoyance is when I want to take a break from productivity to game, only to find that my application has been booted out of memory. Yes, these aspects are definitely intrusive when they do happen, but it's not something I'd pay an extra $700 for! It is bonkers that we don't have an option just to pay for the extra RAM. If it's called the iPad Pro, it should have the same configurability as a MacBook Pro. I know plenty of people, including myself, who prefer to use external SSDs. And honestly, 256GB is plenty to store your work. Heck, I have duplicates of my artwork on my iPad and I still only use 54GB. 57.19GB for my art. The rest is just games. It's all games.
Yeah, you haven't reached my level yet.
I don't need a PC.
The fact that you're forced to buy the 1TB model just to get double the RAM is a bit of a letdown. And what's more of a letdown is the fact that this iPad actually has 12GB of RAM physically inside, but 4GB is disabled for I don't know what reason. Where most Windows laptops have upgradable RAM configurations that are a screw away, if you want to stick at working at high resolutions or doing multitasking on the iPad Pro, you're completely screwed. Now, let's talk about the fabled tandem OLED display. While everyone, including Linus Tech Tips, praises this display to the end, we think there are major issues with it, such as display grain, display warmth, and display PWM. As we explored in our initial review, the display grain is still an issue, albeit I think it's a bit less noticeable on this unit that we have here this year, compared to the ones we had in 2024. Still though, the massive difference in white balance is still ever so present. I'll let this clip speak for itself.
Do you see how this is just green, and the colors are just completely wrong? Like, why is my blue green? And then the blue over here is blue. And also the white is green. But you can't beat the allegations that it is green. It is green. This is green.
Yeah, it is green.
It is. And then this is grey.
We suspect that this is due to the abnormally large green pixels found on the substrate of the tandem OLED. Yes, you can definitely get used to the colors on this display, but if you're not a fan of this green tint or warmer look, you best look elsewhere. And no, turning on True Tone does not help. You can, however, use a colorimeter and change the display's default 6500 Kelvin in reference mode, but there's nothing pro-consumer that allows you to change the white balance. You're also stuck at 100 nits if you opt for this change. Apple, just give us a slider to control the temperature. Issues don't end there, unfortunately. The PWM rate is still 480 Hz, which means if you're coming from an IPS panel, you may encounter some slight headaches. Negatives aside, this display is extremely bright for its size, being able to hit a full screen brightness of 1000 nits. This puts the 600 nits of the M1 and M2 mini LED to shame. As for HDR compared to its contemporaries, the M1's mini LED almost looks like a high contrast SDR feed with less details in the shadows and noticeably dimmer highlights. Obviously, a phone is going to get you much brighter HDR feed, but you can't get any better than this at this size. Now for the Apple Pencil Pro. This year they added pinch and rotate. Wait, no, it's squeeze and barrel roll. Painting with brushes that have distinct shapes is much easier to work with. But if these functions don't appeal to you, you could always get the Apple Pencil 2nd Gen, which... Or you could get the Apple Pencil USB-C edition, which charges with a cable, doesn't have pen pressure sensitivity.
But it has tills.
It has tilt! We still don't understand why Apple needed to move all the magnets to accommodate for the new front-facing camera. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe this has any OIS, which means the only reason why they moved the magnets was... I don't even think I need to say it. Now look, so far from what we've explored is only from an artistic front. And the moment you leave that domain, the state of iPadOS starts to make you question the sheer cost of this thing. My configuration here with cellular and 512 gigs costs $2,399, which is very expensive for an iPad. And for the same price, you can buy a whole MacBook Pro and external drawing tablet, which would have double the RAM of this iPad. You also can't do any local programming, nor use desktop apps. So if your workflow incorporates Adobe, Photoshop, or Illustrator, you asked out. Good luck trying to manage music or a photo library, and there's no way to easily convert files. There's also no way to eject an external drive, which risks corruption. For a device that costs more than a MacBook Pro, that's a bit of a tall ask. Yeah, on an artistic front, this device does thrive, but considering the RAM limitations, not even the M2 or the M3 iPads can be sufficient for my use case. And not to mention, for the price of the Apple Pencil Pro, you could literally get a whole drawing tablet for your Windows computer, or even a whole Windows tablet. I mean, it's Pentium, but...